Okay, hi there. My name's Chris Scott. I'm here doing a little video for MidCoast2Tops, just on the planting of a tree. So there's a whole much more to actually, choosing trees, choosing the right spots, spacings, all of that stuff. We'll talk about a bit of that, but the bigger picture of, what you need to plant and why is probably left for another day. And what we're concentrating on now is actually just putting that tree in the ground. And it's a little bit more, it's not rocket science, it's a little bit more than you put the green bit up. So before we start, of course, I've got PPE on. I never go anywhere near the bush without my glasses on. I know that sounds a bit much, but man, you only need one poke in the eye to understand why. It's not funny. And gloves and boots and some decent clothes is probably minimum for this. So what I'm going to go through is the plant, the place, okay, the hole, the adds, which is what you put in the hole as well as the tree, the backfill, how we do that, and then the accessories, guards and stakes and all of those things. So there's a lot more to planting trees, and I could talk about how it takes 2 years to plant a tree, which is an interesting little talk. And then the why question, why are you planting that tree? It is a really good place to start, because that gives you a whole lot of information about what the plant is, where it goes, and how many there are, what they're called, all of that stuff. And that planting may not be necessary, it may not be your best option, and I think we all sort of understand that to some degree, that if you can get local regeneration, that's going to be better than any planting. And the last one, and possibly controversial, that I won't go into today, but I could, is no, you don't necessarily need to plant ground covers. That's not you can't always plant the whole ecosystem at once. It won't work. Anyway, that's for a different day. So the plant. So of course, not all plants fit everywhere. I mean, plants pick where they grow. So we're actually overriding that and picking where this plant, where this plant's going to grow. So we need to be a bit careful about that. There are some species that just occur everywhere across the landscape, but then there's wetland plants that can have their feet wet and are happy with that. There's rainforest plants that require more shelter. Then there's really hardy plants like the callistemons, which are really good if you've got a really exposed site and you want to get something going. There's a range of acacias, which are again, fairly widespread across the landscape, but some of them are a little bit specialised. But then, the eucalypts, they kind of pick where they grow pretty carefully. That's slope position and soil type and drainage. They all pick a spot. So I'm presuming that you've decided all that. You know the plant. You've got your plant. You know where it's going to go. So the place where you're going to plant. So you want sun. For most plants. Some ground covers, some plants will do okay in shade, but generally we're planting out in the open if we're planting trees, because we're trying to get cover. But one thing to remember, particularly with a eucalypt, don't plant a eucalypt in any shade. If you're planting a eucalypt somewhere, you should be able to look up and see a big chunk of sun, because otherwise, a eucalypt in any shade won't do well at all. He'll bend over to get out in the sun, and distort. We've all kind of seen that. So if you're planting into thick grass, you probably need to get rid of that. And I don't have thick grass here, but what I'm going to do is pretend. So you could, if you do use chemicals, you could spray a patch, a metre or so round or across, about a week before you're going to plant, with some Roundup and kill all that grass. That grass then becomes a bit of mulch for you, and you can just dig straight into that. If you're not going to kill that grass, you need to scalp it off. You need to, get in there and scrape that grass off the top, because it will grow and choke your plant. So we've got a nice little spot. Now what I'm going to do, I've got a little bit of water in this bucket. So I'm going to put some liquid fertilizer in that water. And I'm going to put my plants in there to soak. So they are soaked in that before they go in. Liquid fertilizer, it's going to help them to develop root. That's a specialised product called Tree Tonic, actually, from Trees for Earth, I think the company's called. They're the ones who make the pink guards. If you've ever seen pink tree guards, that's where they come from too. They've got some really good products. So I've got my plants soaking, and I'm going to dig a hole. It's going to be hard here, very hard. Might have to go and get the bar actually. But you want to get down at least a shovel depth. Man, that's hard. You want to get down about a shovel depth, and then you want to loosen what's in the bottom of the hole. So if you get your shovel depth out, I mean that's heaps for this plant. I mean there's little augers, there's a little like a cookie cutter thing that just takes a piece of like a divot the size of your tube out. But look, a shovel, and that's a plumber's shovel, not a, see it's got a point on it, so it's a plumber's shovel, not a post hole shovel. Post hole shovel is flat. These are a bit easy to dig with. So I've got my hole, and I've loosened the bottom of the hole. Now, so planting depth, all of the gardening books of course tell you that you've got to plant your tree at the same level as it was in the pot. Well, that's not entirely true, because all of the natives, basically all of the natives that I've planted over the years, you can bury some of the stem, and it's actually a good idea. So that has nodes all the way up here. If you could plant that deep, so my hand would be the soil level, the top of the ground. All of that is buried. It'll make roots out of those nodes. It'll sit in the ground better. Shallow rooted plants move around too much in the wind and don't set root well. It's also down away from the competition of the grass on the surface. And it's down where the moisture is going to be, right down the bottom of that hole. So don't be afraid to put them in a bit deep, particularly if they're a bit long like that, and you can dig the hole deep. It's a bit hard here, so that might be a limiting factor. So that's a paper bark. That's the big broadleaf paper bark, Quinquerneria, and that's a Syzygium, a lily pilly. That's Syzygium astral. Sorry, no, Syzygium smithii. Sorry, used to be Achaemena smithii. So what we've got here is some nice roots pointing down. They've all been trained down by the grooves in that pot, which is why we never plant out of a round pot. Never plant out of a round pot. A plant never forgets its pot. So if you end up with roots going round and round and round your round pot, they won't ever change. They will keep going round and round and round forever. So you can bend them out, trim them, what have you, or you can have a pot like that that's got nicely trained roots down. Now down's good, but it's not ideal because roots actually go out. But for the purposes of a pot, packing them into smaller spaces, what have you, down is good. And you can see we've got little white roots. That means we've got active root growth, which is what we need. And this one too has less root, but you can see little white guys coming out there. So it's away, it's active. That's what we need. So I've got fertilizer there. Now in this bucket I've got a little bit of compost. Now, compost is good, but that could be a specific native tree fertilizer. It could be chicken pellets. All of those things, like chicken pellets, don't let them contact the roots of the plant, so put them in the bottom of the hole, cover it up a bit, and then put your plant on top of that. But compost is good because the soil needs to change. If you're planting into grass, the soil biota under grass is really different from the soil biota under a tree. So trees need to alter that soil biota if you're planting into grass. That's one of the things that inhibits trees in those difficult spots. So yeah, planting into straight kikuyu is really hard for trees, but it's possible. So I'm going to put a bit of that in the bottom of the hole. I'm going to cover that up a bit. I probably don't need to because that's only compost, it's pretty benign. It's very dry here, so I am going to water. Very often in the autumn, we can plant without watering, and I have on many occasions. Water only in the soak with the tubes. They go in the ground with a bit of moist ground, and I don't water. I've planted hundreds of trees like that have survived perfectly. So it's about picking the right time to plant. If you're only planting a few, then you can water. You can manage that. You can work around that. Also, we'll get onto these accessories in a minute, which also manage those environmental conditions for you to make it better for the plant. So when we backfill, we don't put chunks, we don't put lumps in. We have to have good contact with, and putting a bit of this topsoil in around the plant's not a bad idea either, to give it a bit more nutrient and a bit more biology going on. But you don't want big clumps. You don't want big clumps contacting that, which is really hard in this. I mean, that's a bit of road bug. You don't want big clumps contacting the roots. You want no air around the root ball. You want a good contact with the soil. Don't put weeds, or look out particularly for things like little scraps of kikuyu runner, or I don't know, wandering dew fragments, or those sorts of things that are gonna grow out of this hole. So don't put those back in the hole. Make it a little bit lower than the ground around this surface, just so you've got a bit of a hollow, so when you water it, the water doesn't run off. And bingo, there you go. Like I say, planting it a little bit deep won't hurt at all, and has some advantages. You can put a little bit more fertilizer around here if you like. So conditions can vary, So if we're going to have a lot of dry, we can water that. Put a bit of water on that. But what I will say is, I reckon more native plants are killed by over-watering than by under-watering. So, and that's the beauty of being able to plant into wet ground. It's just going to grow there without you having to come and water it. Because the sooner that plant learns to fend for itself, the better. So what we want is, if you like, teenagers that we can throw out of the house, that are on their own. So that's the idea of fertilizer. Some people say, oh, you don't fertilize native plants, they don't like it. Well, they don't mind it at all, I'm here to say, and it'll get them up to that teenager height faster. So you can leave them, they can leave the house and stop eating the food out of your fridge. So to do that, sometimes the conditions are a bit hard. We can do things like have a weed mat. This will hold moisture in the ground around the tree. And all of this adds to your planting costs, of course. So they're about 60 cents or so, those things. So you can imagine how they add up. You can use newspaper, you can use your old beer boxes, are good for that. If you've got a stack of those laying around. Yeah, paddock mulch, paddock hay you can rake up, anything you can get your hand on. You can buy, mushroom compost, or sugarcane, mulch, all of that stuff is fine, and you don't have to spend a lot of money on it, because if you can mow your paddock a bit and rake it up, that's all you need. So mulch will hold help to hold the moisture in. So you've got a couple of options for tree guards. This is the traditional one that we've been sort of playing around with for years, and these mats are made with holes to take these. It's a bit hard. We need to tap that in on there. So like that. So that's, you know, the stakes are about 30 cents and the bag's about so about $1.10 or something that you'll pay for that. My preference is for something a little bit dearer. So that's basically single use, and you find the wallabies will push it down. So it's not really a browsing guard, whereas this is a bit more of a browsing guard. So that's like core flute, the stuff, you know, those real estate agent signs and the politician signs are made out of. Now that's much, you know, that's much more mechanically, you know, strong to give some protection from browsing, particularly you know, rabbits. I mean, look, your wallaby's going to come in over the top, but he's not going to be able to get to your whole plant, and he won't kill it by browsing at least. But that's going to cost you $1.60 or $1.70 or something like that, so it's a little bit dearer. Although, if you pull those off, you know, once your tree's up and you've judged that it doesn't need it anymore, you can take that off and put it in the shed and get another use out of it. The sooner it goes out of the sun, the longer it'll last, because that's what degrades it, is the sun. So when you know the cycle goes around and we end up with all those annual weeds again at the end of summer, remember the Farmers Friends this year were just epic. So when all that happens and you've got all this growth around, maybe you could resist the temptation to mow or slash or whippersnip or whatever around, because it looks a bit untidy. If you keep the area around your plant, this little, you know, ½ metre or something across around the plant, if you keep that weed free, then all those other weeds can actually be of benefit. Think about the drying wind in spring that's about to come. Think about the frost. You know, if you've got weeds standing up around here, this guy's not going to get cold. All of that's going to keep it is going to keep it warm, or, you know, at least damp down the temperature changes over time. It's also possibly in there going to be less obvious to a wallaby, you know, or something else that's going to eat it or damage it. So yeah, so keep this little area around weed free, whether you do that with a mat or whether you just come back and you know, weed it. But mulch should be good, whatever it is. Even if you just rake, you know, there's leaf mulch here that I could just use and put around it. Or, you know, you can buy stuff, or you know, or use your beer boxes, like I said. So that's, and the weeds, you only need to keep that little area weed free. The rest is fine and can actually be beneficial. And as for water, so I like to plant in autumn when there's a fair bit of moisture around. You've had, you know, all of that summer rain, here's hoping, and now, you know, the sun's is lessening. It's not as hot, you know, and you're starting to have, you know, less temperature extremes. That's a good time to plant. But, you know, why I do that is because I put hundreds of plants in, and you cannot water hundreds of plants. So planting in spring after being soaking in the bucket, okay, very often hundreds and hundreds, thousands of trees I've planted and never watered them, not even, you know. So the whole idea of watering in, if you pack in physically well around that plant, that's what watering in does, is take that soil around the plant properly. Then, you know, watering in is less critical. And of course, if you've soaked it, the plant's nice and soaked, and there's some moisture in the ground. There is no moisture in this ground here, so it needs watering. But what I don't want to do is overwater it. So what we want is this plant, as I say, we want it to be an adolescent and leave the house. So part of that is finding its own moisture. And it won't look for moisture if you keep giving it moisture. It just sits here waiting for the person with the bucket. It doesn't bother to look. So you need, if you're going to, give it a bit of water to water it in if you're going into dry ground, but always check whether it's moist or not. See, make sure it's dry before you water it, because if you just water it, you'll just make it waterlog it, or just make it lazy, and it won't, create that root that's not only going to find moisture for it, but it's going to find nutrients for it, and that's going to set it in there and get it growing for you. Well, that's about it. And I did talk about what I could talk about. And those are bigger picture things about how we choose the plants, what areas we might revegetate, and the planning for planting. That's why I say about 2 years. 2 years before today, when you put this in, you're starting to do some planning. You're thinking about where and why you're planting. You're talking to your nursery about orders. You're sourcing seed. Those are the things that lead you up to this day where you can put the right tree in the right spot to get what you want out of that tree planting. Okay, we'll leave it there.